clear, thank you. It is quite clear that this crisis is growing intensely. I spent much of the day with our public health team going over a variety of projections, going over information from the experiences of other parts of the world and details of what we've seen here in New York City. I am very, very concerned that we see a rapid spread of this disease, and it is time to take more dramatic measures. And I will tell you that the issue that's been on everyone's mind is our public schools. I was a public school parent for the entire education of my children, pre-K through 12th grade for both of them. I know just how much our parents depend on our public schools. I know right now there are so many parents who do not necessarily have any other place for their children. There are so many parents who depend on our schools for meals for their children. There are so many public servants we depend on, our first responders, transit workers, healthcare workers who need their kids to be in school. So for everyone who is wondering why this has been such a difficult decision, it's because I know the full cost of shutting our schools. I know all of the negative ramifications of this decision, and it's very painful. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of families. And so this is a decision that I have taken with no joy whatsoever, with a lot of pain, honestly, because it's something I could not in a million years have imagined having to do. But we are dealing with a challenge and a crisis that we have never seen in our lifetimes, and it has only just begun. So I regret to have to announce that as of tomorrow, our public schools will be closed. In other words, to all parents who are hearing this now, there is no school tomorrow, and we will be suspending our public schools until after the spring vacation. And I'm going to say this very precisely. We will make a first attempt to restart our schools on Monday, April 20th. But I have to be honest that we're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of challenges. And we understand how difficult it will be to achieve that goal. But just so everyone has something to organize their thinking around, our first attempt to reopen the public schools will be on Monday, April 20th. I have been very honest about the fact that there is a real possibility that by closing our schools now, we may not have the opportunity to reopen them in this full school year. So we may actually have to go out for the whole school year, which is just extraordinarily painful for our kids, for our parents, for our educators, for so many people, and the notion of a school year being disrupted in this fashion, I have no words for how horrible it is, but it has become necessary. You're going to hear from the Chancellor in a moment, and we're going to talk about the things we're going to do immediately to compensate for the loss of our public schools. And we will put a number of measures in place. And we hope that they are effective and they help, but they will not by any stretch replace the full value of having our kids in school all day. That is just an honest statement. The challenge, and I've said this as recently as this morning, and again, I believe the facts unfortunately have given us no other choice, but there's three things that we have been trying to protect. Most importantly, our public health system, our hospital system, our clinics, everywhere that people go for health care. And two things that feed that system, our public transit system and, of course, our schools. Now that we will not have our normal school schedule, kids in our normal school buildings, we are going to come up with a number of alternatives to try to, as much as possible, still provide our kids with an education remotely, and to provide a physical location for the children of those crucial public workers, those healthcare workers, transit workers, first responders. Those locations will be in various places around the 5 boroughs. We hope between the remote learning and the specialized sites for the children of essential workers that we can keep enough going to support our healthcare system, but it will not be easy. So starting tomorrow morning, again, as of now, school is canceled for tomorrow, canceled to, at minimum, Monday, April 20th, at maximum, the entire 2019-2020 school year. Remote learning will begin on Monday, March 23rd, a week from tomorrow. Our colleagues at the Department of Education have, in these last weeks, been setting up a remote learning system. It has never been attempted by the City of New York on this scale, to say the least. But they have been working on a wartime footing to prepare it. They will be up and running for children in grades K to 12, Monday, March 23rd, in a week. It is a system that will improve with each week and will certainly take time to make it as strong as it could be and needs to be. But it will begin and will be effective starting Monday, March 23rd. Over the next few days, teachers will be trained how to teach remotely. Again, this is going to be a kind of battlefield training. These are not ideal conditions. We're going to have to teach these teachers very quickly. And this is a point where I can say to all our educators, we need you. We need you. These children need you. These families need you. For so many of our educators, there'll be an opportunity to take the tools of your profession and use them in a new way to reach a lot of kids who are going to be dealing with really, really tough circumstances. Keep their education going. Help those seniors to still graduate. We don't want to lose that. For those teachers who will be a part of our learning centers, for the children of essential workers, your work will not only be crucial in terms of supporting our children and their education, you will literally be in a position to help form the backbone of the system we need to keep our healthcare workers at their post. We cannot lose our healthcare workers. We cannot lose our healthcare facilities. So we need to make sure those children are taken care of so our healthcare workers feel the ability to be where we need them most. And we're going to be asking a lot of everyone in the healthcare field, long hours, tough conditions. So supporting their children becomes absolutely crucial. Over the next 5 days, our school locations will be open for one function specifically related to kids, which will be grab-and-go meals on a transitional basis. So that is only for this coming week. At least it'll give some ability for families that need it to have that assurance. But again, these are not for kids to stay in the building, not to eat the meals in the building, to come to the building, get the meals, and take them home for any kids who need them. We're going to be doing a lot of work in the coming days on how to make sure food is readily available for kids at various locations around the city in the days and weeks going forward, but we have more work to do on that front. We will be working to supply technology for every child who needs it. This is, again, the chancellor's been very honest about this, an imperfect situation. We have a lot of kids, of course, who do not have a computer at home, a lot of kids who don't have connectivity. We're going to do our best to supply as much as we can to help those kids. So I'm going to give you some other updates, and then we'll turn to the chancellor. But to say the least, this is a very troubling moment, a moment where I am just distraught at having to take this action. But I became convinced over the course of today there was no other choice. And now I'll tell you the overall numbers of cases, and I think it makes part of the argument clearer. Number of cases is obviously moving rapidly. Confirmed cases at this hour, and that could change literally in a matter of hours. For New York City, we now have a number of confirmed cases for coronavirus of 329. And I remind you, we started this week with several dozen cases. We're now at 329. A borough breakdown from numbers earlier in the day. They will not add up to 329, but it'll give you a flavor of the breakdown. 78 cases in Queens, 72 cases in Manhattan, 53 cases in Brooklyn, 21 cases in the Bronx, and 16 cases in Staten Island. Yes, indeed. 78 cases in Queens, 72 cases in Manhattan, 53 cases in Brooklyn, 21 cases in the Bronx, 16 cases in Staten Island. That is ever changing. One of the worst things I have to tell you now is we are now at 5 total deaths in New York City. Again, as recently as Friday afternoon, there were none. It's now 5. You all know about the 82-year-old woman from Brooklyn who suffered from emphysema, then was hospitalized related to coronavirus. We lost her. Now 4 more deaths reported related to coronavirus. A 79-year-old woman who did have pre-existing conditions of heart failure and lung disease, a 78-year-old man who had multiple pre-existing conditions, a 56-year-old man who had diabetes, and a 53-year-old woman who had diabetes and heart disease. We feel horrible for these families. We grieve with them. They're in our thoughts and prayers. And it is a reminder to everyone of how vulnerable that part of our population is that is older and has those pre-existing conditions, and we must protect them. And another reminder that anyone in your life who meets that standard, we have to isolate them from anyone who might be sick, even if it's their loved ones. A number of other specific actions. I will tomorrow sign an executive order requiring all hospitals in New York City to cancel elective surgery in the coming days. This is one of the powers that exist under the state of emergency. We will work to word this specifically to allow the flexibility, because some hospitals can continue over a period of a few days to close out some existing elective surgeries. Not all of them have to go to zero instantly, but they will all have to go to zero on elective surgeries soon. So that will be codified as an executive order, and that will be a requirement of all hospitals. Obviously, our public health system is ready to do that immediately. We see several of our voluntary hospitals have started down that path, but everyone needs to do it. It's absolutely that time. And even if a hospital at this moment does not have a demand related to coronavirus that requires, in their eyes, the cancellation of elective surgeries, that day is coming very, very soon, and we just have to make this a standard across the board. We are canceling the special election for Queens Borough President that was scheduled for March 24th. Details will be provided soon on potential options for holding that election later and other ways we might be able to approach that election, but we did not have those details yet. But there's been a lot of concern raised about the election day and all of the experiences, particularly that the poll workers would have to make this work. And as we have seen more and more challenges, this is another one that's very painful, honestly. In a democratic society, the canceling of an election is such a rarity. It should be avoided at all costs. But in this case, with the nature of this crisis, I've come to the decision it's necessary. We will be closing our senior centers, ending all programming there with the exception of activities related to food. We will turn them into feeding centers, again focused on grab and go, meaning pickup of meals for those seniors for whom that works. They'll also primarily be locations for preparing and delivering meals to seniors' homes. So instead of being a place for seniors to go to eat meals in the senior center, they'll become a dispensary to get quality meals out to seniors, whether it's by delivery or by pickup. But we will no longer have any programming in our senior centers. Tonight in all 5 boroughs, the FDNY, the New York City Sheriff's Office, and Department of Business will be cracking down on businesses that are not abiding by the 50% occupancy rule. In the first day There was warnings given, there was an attempt to educate, but now, given the nature of the crisis, it's time for violations to be written. Those violations come with penalties. And we are asking all businesses, and that obviously largely means restaurants, bars, all businesses that have a number of people coming in and can become crowded. We can't afford those crowded spaces anymore. So stay to the 50% level, or you will be penalized. If you cannot make your business viable at the 50% level, we understand. We wish there was something we could do otherwise, and any business that feels they have to close as a result, we understand that. We are not any more happy than you are. We'll try and be helpful in any way we can, but we cannot have bars and restaurants at over 50% capacity. I will also say we are going to take a look at even going farther related to bars and restaurants. We have not made that decision yet. There have been a series of meetings today at City Hall and OEM. There's going to be more meetings this evening on additional topics. So in terms of the future of bars and restaurants, that is an ongoing discussion that will continue this evening. There's also a discussion that will be solidified this evening on programs related to young people. I want to say very frankly, at the same time we are closing schools, I am tremendously concerned about what's going to happen with young people out in our communities without enough positive options, particularly teenagers. But we cannot have large congregations of young people in small spaces. One of the things we're going to be looking at is, as the weather is getting warmer, can we convert some programming to outside? Is that an option that would allow us to continue some youth programming? That's something we're going to try and determine this evening. Just finishing a few points and then to the Chancellor. The federal government, some progress, I don't want to say a little, there's been some real progress over the last few days. It is nowhere near what we need. We still need more FDA approval for more companies to do the automated testing. We still need the Senate to pass the stimulus, and then we'll need additional stimulus thereafter, although there's been serious progress in the last few days on support for working people, and a safety net is a strong beginning, but it's nowhere near what people are going to need for a crisis of this magnitude, so we have to see more. I am particularly concerned about medical supplies and all supplies needed in this city, but particularly medical supplies, ventilators, masks, face guards, sanitizer, everything that not only are we going to need in huge quantities, but Washington State will need, California will need, every part of this country that experiences this crisis right now. We've asked repeatedly and have no indication from the federal government that there has been an effort to, in effect, nationalize the production process, meaning to ensure that these companies and factories that produce these goods are on a 24/7 basis until this crisis is over, and that the goods are being distributed where they're needed most. This is a wartime approach. It is well known in the history of this country. We have not seen any effort so far by the federal government in a meaningful way to do it. And meanwhile, this crisis is bearing down on us. We must have a consistent supply of these particularly crucial goods, and we cannot guarantee that at this moment. I'm going to emphasize something that Dr. Barbeau said, and in the Q&A, I'm sure she'll get into it further. In light of the growing number of cases, amending the guidance for the vast majority of people, and Dr. Barbeau can get into any exceptions or specifics, but for people who get sick with those symptoms, those what we would think were normally the seasonal kind of cold and flu-like symptoms, stay home. Do not go to work. If your child is sick, do not send your child to any kind of program. Stay home. We're saying now 3 or 4 days is the time frame to see the direction of the disease. If you're getting better, great. If you're not getting better at that point, then that's the time to call the doctor and discuss next steps. But remember, we are now going to be in a situation where our healthcare system is going to be increasingly stressed. We need people to recognize who will be the priority. Obviously, we've already said it, the folks who are in most danger, we have to protect first. Folks who might not be in any danger at all, we're going to ask them to wait, and then if they need to get care, that makes sense, but first to wait and see it develop. Before, just a couple of words in Spanish, and the Chancellor, look, I'll conclude with this. We've never been through anything like this. We're all trying to make sense of it. I've talked to so many New Yorkers. Everyone is confused. Everyone is in pain. Everyone feels like we're dealing with the great unknown because we are dealing with the great unknown. The only way we get through it is by supporting each other. The only way we get through it is by people actually following through on the information they're receiving and then backing each other up, supporting each other, looking out for each other. There's no other way. We've got to take this more and more seriously with every passing day. It's tough. It's tough to get out of the patterns that we've lived our whole lives in. But something's changed, and it's not going back. So I ask you, all New Yorkers, there's no place on earth where people are stronger, tougher, more resilient, and more compassionate. There is no place on earth better than New York City. We're going to need to show that right now. Everyone, step up. Look out for the people in your life, because they're going to need you. A few words in Spanish. Debido al coronavirus, estamos cerrando las escuelas públicas de la ciudad de Nueva York. Estas decisiones fueron difíciles, pero tenemos que proteger a los neoyorquinos. Juntos responderemos como siempre lo han hecho los neoyorquinos y superaremos esta crisis. With that, one person I want to speak now is our school's chancellor, and then we'll open up to questions. Chancellor Richard Carranza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a very sobering day for all of us, and as the mayor has been very clear from day one, as circumstances continue to evolve, so does this city's response to the COVID-19 situation. And the situation continues to evolve. We've been monitoring this closely day by day, hour by hour, in some cases minute by minute. And this weekend, as the mayor has announced, we've taken a sobering look at what is happening in our city, the rise in cases across the city, and quite frankly, the sustainability of continuing public education in our school buildings for the time being in the way that we have educated children for years. So the mayor and I have been clear that any changes to the current model would be an extreme measure and a decision we consider the last resort. We're at the last resort. So as the mayor has announced, effective tomorrow, school will not be in session in the traditional way that we've become accustomed to. Students come to school, parents drop students off, teachers, administrators, custodial staff, everybody comes to school. We want you to think of tomorrow as a snow day. So everybody stays back. And I want to thank Henry Garrido and his union members, because our food and nutrition workers are going to come to their schools, and they will be available to distribute in a grab-and-go methodology breakfast and lunch for our students. So for this next week, you can go to your school. You won't go in, but you can grab food if you need the food. So on Monday, all school-based personnel will stay home. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week, we're asking our principals and our teachers to come to school. We will practice social distancing, of course, but it's going to be critical because we are going to be distributing training, giving guidance on what the remote learning will look like over the next 4 weeks. What will be critical as well is that resources that teachers have, there'll be an opportunity for teachers to upload those resources as well. So it's going to be important that for the next 3 days, our teachers and principals are in school buildings. Students will not be in our school buildings. And then Friday will be another day of training for those who need it virtually. As the mayor has announced, on Monday, the 23rd, we will launch into remote learning across the city. We feel confident that students will be able to continue to engage academically. It belies any logic to say it will be the same thing as a student in a classroom with a teacher. But I have tremendous, tremendous faith in the teachers of New York City, in the administrators of New York City. And I know that if there's any school system that can launch into remote learning on a moment's notice like we're about to do, it is the New York City Department of Education. I'm going to ask all parents, if you have not yet done so, please sign up for the New York City Schools account. This is going to be critically important as we push information out, but also important for you to get resources to be able to support your students' remote learning needs. We are pushing through all of our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and I will be amplifying that, the exact way of signing up for a New York City Schools account. It's not difficult, but it's going to be critical. Additional guidance on what this will look like, all of the details and the who and the what and the where will be forthcoming over the course of this week and in the coming weeks as well. Also on March 23rd, we will be opening several dozen regional enrichment centers across the city in all of our boroughs to serve the children of our city's first responders, including healthcare workers, and to serve our most vulnerable student populations. That Monday, we will also launch remote learning for grades K-12. And those resources, if you want to preview, are available on our website as we speak. I also want to be clear about a few things and amplify what the mayor has said. Breakfast and lunch will be available for any student who wants it, starting tomorrow through April 8th, the first day of spring recess. We will also be in close communication regarding technology pickup locations for regional enrichment centers in the coming days. As I have mentioned in response to questions, we understand that there are students that may not have devices. We understand that there are students and families that may not have Wi-Fi connection at home. We are working with a number of partners. We estimate about 300,000 of our students are in need of devices. We have partners that have stepped up. The City of New York has stepped up. And we believe we can actually get devices into the hands of our students who need them. We're going to also prioritize our students living in temporary housing, our students that are living in poverty, and students that do not have access to those resources. As the mayor has mentioned, this has been a very sobering 48 hours for both of us. We believe and strongly believe the best place for a child is in a schoolhouse with a well-trained, caring teacher. We know that our teachers believe their place is in a schoolhouse caring for their children. And as a teacher, I can tell you my kids were my kids. We're going to ask teachers to continue with that philosophy. They're still your students. You're just going to be helping them a little remotely now. We want to assure families also that we're working to make this as a seamless of a transition as possible. We're not lowering our expectations. We're just changing the delivery method of instruction. And we know that with our dedicated and, I would say, passionate staff, our school staff, our teachers, custodians, administrators, and especially our school food workers who are going to continue to work during this time, we know that we will be serving our 1.1 million students. This is a time, as the mayor has said, for us to be together as New Yorkers, not physically, but philosophically, for sure. A few words in Spanish. Como ha anunciado el señor alcalde de Blasio, anunciamos que mañana, el día del lunes, no habrá clases en la ciudad de Nueva York. Queremos que piensen como mañana como un día de nieve, en donde maestros y estudiantes no vienen a la escuela. Empezando el martes hasta el jueves, estamos pidiendo que los administradores en las escuelas y los maestros vuelvan a las escuelas. Va a haber entrenamiento, va a haber recursos que se les van a compartir y el viernes va a seguir, pero no va a seguir en persona. Empezando el 23 de marzo, vamos a iniciar el aprendizaje de distancia. Y ese aprendizaje de distancia va a depender en la tecnología para que estudiantes puedan seguir aprendiendo a través de la tecnología con sus maestros. Sin embargo, reconocemos de que no todos tienen computadoras en las casas, no todos tienen la conexión del Internet. Sin embargo, va a haber información para que padres obtengan información cómo obtener una computadora y cómo obtener la conexión de Internet. Entonces, queremos que estén pendientes. Les voy a pedir, por favor, a cualquier padre que no lo ha hecho a este momento, que se inscriban para una cuenta que se llama New York City Schools Account. El método para inscribirse, vamos a estar anunciándolo por los medios de comunicación y es bien fácil, pero es crítico para que nosotros podamos compartir con ustedes importante información y que ustedes también tengan la información necesaria para apoyar a sus hijos durante este tiempo. Con eso, Mr. Mayor, turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chancellor. Okay, questions? Yeah.
Can you say more about enforcing the 50% capacity? Can you repeat what the agencies are, when that's going to start,
Sure.
what the fines are, and maybe St. Patrick is upon us. How are you going to enforce this thing?
It's, I mean, obviously, look, this, to state the obvious, all of this has been painful. You know, St. Patrick's Parade, something that's been around over 200 years, shutting down our school system for who knows how long. This is just painful, painful stuff. The fact is, though, we have to enforce these rules. So it will be FDNY, it will be Department of Buildings, it will be the sheriff. The initial, as I understand it, the first violation is a fine of $400. I'm going to confirm that, and then it escalates with any future violation. Also, the authority in question will ensure on the spot that the audience, if you will, in the establishment is brought down to 50%. So they will not leave until they're under 50% right then and there. And again, this is a beginning. We announced this policy in accordance and agreement with the state. We have given people the chance to acclimate to it. They've been given warnings. Now the enforcement begins in earnest. If folks do not comply, we will just keep ramping up penalties, but we're also going to assess the bigger situation. As I said, with bars and restaurants, it may be necessary to go farther soon, and that's something we'll start the conversation on in just a few hours.
If someone's intransigent, can there be arrests?
Of course. I mean, this is emergency. And anyone who's intransigent in the middle of a pandemic deserves to be arrested.
Mayor, I hope you'll indulge me a couple questions.
Yeah.
Say that. You've said if you're sick to stay home. What if you're not feeling symptoms? We know that asymptomatic people can shed the virus. It's not clear to people. What do you do if you're not feeling sick? Do you also stay home?
So I'm going to start and pass to the healthcare experts. One, let's just, it's a very fair question, but I want to not negate the sort of the pillars of the guidance we're giving. If you do feel sick, stay home. You don't need to try and figure out what category it falls in. If you feel sick, stay home. Your kids are sick, stay home. If you're sick, don't get with older relatives or sick relatives. Okay. And then I'm going to try, and the doctors will jump in if they don't like anything they hear, and they'll jump in anyway. What we see is transmission, certainly primarily coming from symptomatic people. Simple reason, I think you told me, Dr. Barbeau, because it's symptomatic people who are sneezing, who are coughing. It is through droplets, so something has to happen. And that's much, much more likely to happen with symptomatic people. That does not negate your question. It just says the odds are really much more in favor of transmission from symptomatic people. Is that too layman? Nope. Okay, come on up.
So I want to broaden the response a little bit because we're talking about social distancing, which means creating physical distance between individuals. But I want to just sort of hit home the point that the mayor and Chancellor Carranza have been saying in terms of while we may be asking New Yorkers to distance themselves physically, we're asking them to come together emotionally. This is a sober time for the city, and it's an opportunity for New Yorkers to do as they have done historically and help one another. And so while it may be theoretically possible for someone who is asymptomatic to transmit the virus, there really is no indication that the asymptomatic people are responsible for this explosion worldwide. And that's why it's so important for people who are symptomatic to stay home. Every day we are learning more about how this virus behaves. And initially we gave New Yorkers the advice to stay home for 24 to 48 hours. We're now learning more that in reality, we've been saying 80% will have a mild course. That's bearing itself out here in New York City, and we feel comfortable saying if you're not better in 3 or 4 days, but you're not getting worse, then this is the time not to go to the doctors. Maybe you call them. But by all means, if you are not getting better, that's who we want to make sure reaches out to your doctor, gets access to care, because we're not asking people to stay home and suffer. We're just asking them to spend a little bit more time recuperating. And if you're getting better, then stay on that trajectory. If you're not getting better, then seek care.
That's if you're sick, but if you're not sick, should you stay home?
Well, in this situation, yeah, that's the reason why we're closing the schools. That's the reason why we're telling people not to go to work if they can telecommute, because we want people to have more distance from each other, not because we think that asymptomatic people are spreading the virus, but because we want to reduce the number of New Yorkers that get infected. And as importantly, if not more importantly, we want to reduce the number of New Yorkers who are at risk for bad health outcomes, such as needing to end up in the hospital, in the ICU, or God forbid, dying because of this. And it's a real reality. And so it's incumbent on all of us to play our part and stay home.
Let me amplify one piece. If you can stay home, and that's a crucial, I mean, again, this is why this school's decision is so painful. I know there are many parents who right now are scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. I mean, obviously, everyone's been paying attention and known that we were dealing with an incredibly difficult situation. But, you know, there are some people in this town, if they are still going to work, they could bring their child to work. There are plenty of people in this town who that would never be allowed. And there are a lot of people who still need a paycheck. Now, something has changed in the last few days, and I'm sure we will get questions along the way of sort of how thinking evolves, how strategy evolves. I will say that Friday night really signified a change, because we were far from certain the federal government was going to get into a serious relief effort, because it's been so slow and because of obvious partisan and philosophical issues in the Congress. The bill that passed the House was very substantial relief. It's shocking to me the Senate didn't stick around. I don't understand that for the life of me, but we presume they're going to pass it tomorrow. And Senator Schumer has said he believes there will be another package immediately behind it. That at least gives us a little more assurance that folks who now can't go to work anymore will have some support. But that's not enough at this moment. I mean, you're hopeful it will come, but right now there's a lot of people who just can't yet say to themselves, I'm just not working. You know, they literally have bills to pay. They literally can't take the risk. So if you don't have to go to work, don't go to work. If you're sick, don't go to work. If you can telecommute, telecommute. At minimum, if you can stagger hours away from rush hour, do. Obviously, rush hour is getting reduced all the time, but do. But I also want to be real about the fact there's a number of people who do have to go to work, including the ones we are requiring because of their call to duty to go to work, and they are doing an amazing job. Our healthcare workers, our first responders, our transit workers, and obviously we're going to need our educators in a different way now. So it's not as simple as like everyone can totally 100% stay home at this moment, but anyone who has the ability to should. And I'll give you one more, and then I got to give it to others.
But this is all just follow-up on my first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You'll get another chance after. One more, and then we're going to everyone else.
Criminal justice system, right?
Right.
Island, the courts. School's going to be closed. What about all the people in our jails?
The folks in our jails are in our jails right now with a lot of specific precautions. There's definitely distancing initiatives going on, very careful checks on health care. We'll have more to say on that. That's one of the areas that's going to come up next on the agenda. But I'm very concerned about it. But that doesn't mean we don't need a functioning jail system.
One of your concerns in not closing the schools last week was that it's not like you close the schools, these kids are just going to stay in their house.
Correct.
You said they were going to gather.
Yep.
So aren't they still going to gather?
Yep.
What do you do to stop that?
We can't.
How do you convince young people that you're not making a big deal of it?
I'm not going to lie to my fellow New Yorkers. We're not going to convince teenagers to not gather if they're out of school for weeks on end. We are going to try and maximize distance learning, which the better we can make it and the more cooperation we get from parents, who again are going through amazing stress right now. Parents are going through so much at this moment. We're going to ask them to help us, and obviously, Richard, jump in if you wish. The parents and family members, guardians, help us get kids connected to the distance learning and keep them connected. But we have no illusion. We do not have the same control we have in a school building. We just don't. And I've been very blunt about it. If we're talking about initially weeks, it could be months. Anyone who believes those kids are patiently going to sit in their room in their apartment and never go outside, it just has never met a teenager. They eventually, whether it's during school hours or after school or weekends, they're going to go seek out their friends. They're going to create their social networks. There's going to be the possibility of transmission. I'm sure, I think it's a factual statement. It's probably a better reality than being in a school building in some ways, but it's not pristine. And then we will have to have some kids in those learning centers for the children of our first responders, et cetera. So this is not a perfect equation. It's a very imperfect equation, but it became necessary. And of course, we're going to do our best if we see, of our police officers and other public servants see congregations of young people, we're going to obviously try and reduce that, space that out. If we see any nefarious activity, that's where the police will come in. But it's going to be a tremendous challenge when you talk about so many kids in such a big city.
Can I ask a couple of questions of the Chancellor?
Yeah.
Two things. I'll try to be really short. The first one is, can you go into some details about what the remote learning might look like for parents that have no clue what that's going to mean? And the second thing is, a lot of 5th and 8th graders are waiting for their acceptance letters for middle schools and high schools. Will the closure impact this for them?
So remote learning is exactly what it says. You're learning remotely from your home or wherever alternate location you are. So it's going to look different in different places. We currently have on our website, New York City Department of Education website, about 10 days worth of from K-12 of materials and assignments and activities that by grade level parents can access. Now, again, we're flying the plane as we're building the plane, so the next steps are to translate those materials into a number of languages. That's happening actively as we speak. But we know this is going to go beyond 10 days, so part of bringing our educators back on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is going to be to capture and populate that website and that platform with additional resources. We also know that there are a great number of our schools that already utilize Google Platform, Google Classroom. So we're going to, and part of the training that'll happen these next few days, is schools that don't currently have a presence on Google Classroom, they will get trained on how to use it, which allows teachers then to, in a virtual way, submit assignments, push information out. There's going to be a number of third-party partners that we have in our school system that already provide additional supplementary types of activities. So all of those things will continue to be how we continue to build this remote learning platform for parents and for students, which is why it's really critical that we have all of our families on signed up for that New York City Schools accounts so that they can get that information. This is going to continue to evolve over the course of the next few days, next few weeks, and we're committed to being very, very transparent about what's available and what's new. And I've got to tell you, I have tremendous, tremendous faith in the teachers in New York City who I've seen do some incredibly innovative things already. We want to capture that as well, so that's available to other students and families. Your second question was about admissions letters. We'll get back to you on that. I don't see why that's going to be affecting students, because the central offices, we're going to continue to work. So I don't see why that would be delayed, but we'll confirm that for you.
On the national level, the top infectious disease expert is calling for, he wants a 14-day national shutdown. Do you think you're going to see a 14-day city shutdown? What would happen?
We're going to be making day-to-day, hour-to-hour decisions. I mean, right now, this crisis is getting a lot worse very quickly. And we have been, as I said, over the course of this day, analyzing a whole lot more information and trying to assess where it's going. And it's certainly very, very sobering. So I'm not ruling anything out, but I think the smart thing for New Yorkers to recognize, we're going to make each announcement the second it's ready. But I don't want to project something until we're sure. But everything, literally every option is on the table right now. Yeah.
How do you
protect these I mean, I've talked to so many workers who are servers, and, or in the service industry or gig workers, and, some of them can't apply for unemployment because they're not full-time, or, there's just no safety net for them, and they're getting laid off because they're not needed at their restaurants. Have you been in talks with Senator Schumer or the feds or the state? I mean, their states, California now, Ohio, Illinois, are shutting down bars and restaurants now. It's probably inevitable that that's going to happen. So what protections are going to be there?
Senator Schumer and I have definitely talked about what needs to be in the next stimulus bill. And this is exactly the kind of thing we've talked about, that it has to go much deeper into the workforce and provide a lot more income replacement for a lot longer. Look, this is the great unknown. We haven't seen something like, think doctors, you agree, we haven't seen something like this in the United States of America since 1918. So literally over a century. We're in a whole different reality than 1918. Thank God we do have a lot of advantages compared to them. But on the other hand, we're dealing with the great unknown. We're literally dealing with a disease that they still don't know entirely how it works. There's no cure, there's no vaccine. So we've got to recognize the sheer magnitude. But even though that's the only parallel you can find to this pandemic and the experience in America, there is a positive example of helping people in crisis across the board, and we actually lived it. And a lot of people are walking around today who are part of it, and it's called the New Deal. It actually happened, where the federal government determined that it would, in that instance, employ people outright and provide every conceivable form of financial support, and it saved this country. This is a different situation physically, right? You obviously have to make sure people get through the immediate crisis, but this is a crisis that will end. One of the things we talked about today is the fact that over time, this disease will reach its high point and then will start to recede. It will end. But the financial, the economic, the human impact has only just begun, and it will go long past the point where we say the immediate crisis with the disease is over. The federal government has the power to address that, to borrow some of the tools of the New Deal and use them in our time. And they have the power to get ahead of the medical crisis by ensuring that the supplies we need are there. We're all talking about ventilators. We're here in the biggest city in the country. We right now are an island. If we don't get help from the federal government to get those ventilators that we need going forward, we will simply run out. Right now we have a strong supply, and we're looking for any more we can get. But there's going to be a point where if we don't get help from the federal government, if we don't get help from the military, we will simply run out. There's still time to fix that. Yeah.
Two questions. The first is for Chancellor Carranza. Can you describe what this will look like? Teachers, will they be teaching from home? Are kids expected to be in front of a computer, normal school hours? Are they going to get grades? Are attendance going to be taken?
You got it. How much will it be like regular school?
It's not going to be like regular school. I mean, that's impossible to create those conditions again, which is why I said it's going to look different in different places with different teachers, different subject areas, different grade levels, et cetera. What we want to be able to do is provide as much flexibility for our teachers and for our students to continue to be engaged intellectually over the course of however long this is going to last. I would ask people to think about what happens in the summer. And there's a term that we use called summer slide, where you're not actively engaged and you start, you start regressing a little bit on your skill set. No one would ever say that summer school is exactly like the traditional school year. But what it does is it prevents that summer slide. What we're trying to say is, instead of saying we're not going to be in session for 4 weeks and figure it out, do what you got to do, we want to be able to provide resources and support. And our teachers are still working. They're just not working in the building, and provide the infrastructure so teachers can continue to connect with students. Students can continue to connect with teachers. I would not be surprised. All the details about what's that going to look like will become much more clear after we have our teachers kind of weigh in with us.
And for Dr. Barbeau, you believe that it's only theoretical that there could be asymptomatic transmission. Dr. Birx of the White House said, I'll read a quote, "We don't want to say that the risk is low. We don't know how low the numbers are for people who are asymptomatic." So can you reconcile, what you believe with what she said yesterday?
Yeah, I believe what I said was that it is theoretically possible for someone who's asymptomatic to shed the virus, but they're not accounting for the explosion that we're seeing. It's the symptomatic people that are accounting for the spread, not just in the city, but worldwide.
On the bars and restaurants, at last count, there were something like 27,000 restaurants in New York City. How much enforcement do you realistically expect can get done here? And as an addendum, why isn't the NYPD helping with that?
Oh, they will. This is literally, so this is a policy that came out Thursday with initial applicability date of Friday with explicit decision to educate and warn for the first 24 hours, and now enforcement will begin in earnest. NYPD will absolutely be a part of it. It's a huge task. Now, I think there are a lot of bar and restaurant owners and employees who have gotten the memo here because they see what we're all seeing nonstop, who are not taking it lightly. I have definitely heard reports of bars and restaurants that have spaced out their tables and are doing the right thing. I think there are others that have simply closed because they didn't think they could keep going. I believe as enforcement ramps up and word spreads that it's serious, that will help lock things down further. But again, we have bigger decisions to make soon. But I don't think it's one way or another. I think there's some places that are going to try not to do it, but there's a lot of places I think take it seriously.
I have two questions. One is about the ferries. Observers are saying that the ferries are not being cleaned as strictly or as often.
You mean Staten Island or you mean NYC ferry?
NYC ferries.
We'll find out.
Also, are you guys going to ramp up service since there is like an outdoor option on a ferry rather than being in a confined space like a subway or bus?
An excellent question. On the first one, I'll check the cleaning schedule. I know EDC takes this very seriously and they're very efficient. On the second one, it's a very good point. And obviously the weather is supporting us now. I mean, we're literally on the verge of formal spring and it's getting warmer. But I don't have an answer for you at this hour. It's something we can come back to you on.
The second question I have is Cuomo this morning was talking about state hopping. If we close stores in one state, people will come to New York from New Jersey and vice versa. So Hoboken has enacted a curfew from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. Are we worried at all that a lot of those people seeking libation will just come over?
Thirsty Hobokeners, is that the category? Yeah. I don't know. I think right now we are going through such an intense, fast transformation. I think a lot of people are recognizing the dangers, and so I don't expect people traveling long distances. I expect a lot of people to get their libations and go home, but that's just me thinking common sense. I think it becomes an interesting question as this all develops, but right now, I'm not sure that those actions are going to have a big impact on us.
Are we considering a curfew?
Everything is on the table. Curfew is one of the emergency powers I have under the state of emergency. We have not made that decision, but everything's on the table.
Mayor, one quick question, then a follow-up. With respect to the schools and the teachers going in to learn this new learning platform, some have already messaged us and said, is there a way for us to learn virtually ourselves, this virtual platform, so we're not exposed to other people? Just how would you address those concerns?
It's a fair concern, but I think the reality is not as well as they need to. I mean, we've been talking about this. It's a very fair question. We obviously worked it through. This is a battlefield condition. We're asking people in 3 days to prepare to teach in an entirely different manner. I think in terms of the sheer efficacy and putting materials in their hand and one thing or another, we're going to be in much better shape coming into the building. But of course, we're going to distance people and be respectful of that need. And there's no kids there, so it's a very different environment. And anyone who's sick, of course, should not come. Going forward, we'll do our best to keep updating virtually, but I think it's just an honest reality to teach people, many of whom will be the first time they've done it. It's hard to do all of that virtually. And Richard, I'm just trying to summarize from our conversation, right? Go ahead.
Question is, you were the mayor after Sandy, but you were the mayor during Ebola. Obviously, the idea of an infectious disease or virus in this city is not a new one.
Right.
Was there not a plan in place ahead of time to say, okay, if we were in a situation like this, how do we shut down the schools to address the understandable concerns you've raised over the last week or so, which is lunches and then healthcare or essential workers not having them?
There's OEM, and the Office of Emergency Management, for a living does that kind of planning. Each agency has their version of that planning. But you have to be honest about the fact that it's very theoretical until you deal with the real thing. In the last weeks, all of that planning has advanced intensely in each agency. We would not be able to tell you that on Monday, March 23rd, we are going to have distance learning for 1 million kids if a lot of work had not been done already. We wouldn't be able to tell you we are going to be able to do, tomorrow morning grab-and-go meals, breakfast and lunch, if work had not been done. The same with the ability to set up alternative learning sites by Monday the 23rd for the essential workers kids. So there's a lot of planning. There's also a lot of concern that all of these things are so different than what we normally do. It will take time to get it to be as good as we want it to be, and it will never be as good as everyone being in a classroom. That's just the truth.
Mayor, can you describe your conversations with 1199 and what prompted the change of your position to close schools?
Of my...
What prompted your choice to close schools?
Well, those are two very different topics. Let me start with the bigger one. Look, it kind of goes against everything I believe to take a decision that I know will have so many negative ramifications, and I don't think I've sugarcoated them in any of these conversations over the last few days. I was a public school parent. I was a school board member. I mean, the notion of our public schools being closed, not for weeks, but potentially for months, and what that's going to do to kids, the notion of a lot of kids unsupervised, the health and safety problems that come with that. I mean, I could go on and on. I have delineated. It just was a very painful, difficult decision. But it became clear to me as we went through the projections that it was just necessary. As bad as in other words, you're now baking in a lot of negative impact, a lot of damage that's going to be done. But the threat was growing so intensely that we had to accept it. And I think it's kind of rare that you you make a lot of decisions in this work, but where you're doing something that will cause so much harm, but unfortunately it's like a sacrifice that has to be done for a greater good. And we have never seen anything like this disease. Yeah, I went through Ebola, I went through a lot of things, never seen anything like this. So it was really seeing the latest models. They're still being perfected, but just seeing where we were at this point, talking through the ramifications. And obviously appreciating that the DOE has been working constantly over these last days to try and get a fallback ready, and they felt confident in the last 24 hours that they could provide a quality option. I needed to hear that. That was not so clear days ago, but it was clear this weekend. And the federal stimulus was also a part of my thinking. I thought a couple of days back, 3-4 days ago, that there was a question of the panic it might induce. There's a question of the way it would have an impact on people's livelihoods if people couldn't go to work. But that now has changed. I mean, so many people increasingly can't go to work anyway, and there's finally some federal support coming in and some safety net being built. So that gave me at least a little solace that we had some more room to maneuver. Vis-a-vis 1199, I mean, it's a union I think very, very highly of, work closely with over decades. We are depending on their members. They're crucial to the battle ahead. They're the healthcare workers that will keep our hospitals, clinics going. A few days ago, they were tremendously worried about no school for their kids, and then I think they looked at other factors and they came back and said they had changed their minds. They have every right to that, but that was not part of the decision. The decision was based on all the other things I said.
Their change of heart didn't influence your
No, I respect them. I spoke with George Gresham. I really respect him, but no, this was many, many layers and many, many other factors that were really about 1 million kids and their families. That's how the decision was made. Okay, we're almost done. Let me see if there's anything else. Go ahead.
One of you guys done?
Oh, Mayor, 22 foster care and other social service organizations sent you a letter expressing concern about mandatory face-to-face visits and ratios and things that they worry go against the rules and compromise people's health. What kind of guidance are you giving them, and what should they all be doing?
It's a very fair question, and this is exactly the next level of things we're going to start to deal with. Some of the questions that come up here, our correction system, social services, youth programs. We're going to start one by one dealing with each of those. Yeah, someone, I can't even remember which day is which anymore, Andrew. I think you'll forgive me, but I think it was Friday, someone called in to WNYC about in-person interviews for food stamps or for public assistance. We want to try and weed out everything we can weed out. Anything that doesn't have to be in person, really urgently, we don't want to put people in that situation, and we got to move quickly. On the other hand, we have to get people support. So on that previous question about the food stamps and public assistance, we can't see that collapse. The foster kids are depending on us. We have to make sure we have a way of supporting them. But doing as many things virtually as possible, streamlining, as little gathering as possible, that's what we're going to be working on.
I just want to really get some clarity, because I don't have it, and I don't think the folks at home have it.
What don't you have?
No, my mom doesn't.
You were talking about the disease or the clarity?
Not symptomatic.
Yep.
I get you're saying don't go to work if you can possibly not go to work. But what about all the other stuff? Having dinner with people, going to a restaurant.
If you're not symptomatic.
If you're not symptomatic,
Okay.
should you still stay home besides not?
So I'm going to start, and I'll let the healthcare professionals jump in. I'm a human being. I respect that doctors have the perspective, the sort of pure medical perspective. It's just like the question earlier, what are teenagers going to do? I know what teenagers are going to do. I had teenagers. I know I was a teenager, you know.
A lot of adults want to follow the best practice.
Right, and so what I'm saying is, of course, we want people to just continue to reduce what they do out in the world to as little as possible. If they don't need to go to work, don't go to work. If you don't need to go out and go to events or gatherings or need to go to a restaurant, the less the better. On the other hand, I'm trying to be real, and again, the doctors can come in and be tougher, but I'm trying to be real about the fact that some people, you know, maybe seeing that long-lost friend or relative is so important to them, you know, even if it's brief. I don't want to suggest we're at the point of saying literally no one can go outside. We may say that very, very soon. I think we're saying avoid anything unnecessary. Just be really judicious about it, especially if you're sick, stay home, and if someone else is sick, don't go near them. So I'm not telling you can never do anything fun. I am telling people, you know, reduce everything you can reduce. Now, again, doctors, if you want to bring down the hammer, go ahead.
I think we've been clear, and thank you for the opportunity to make it even clearer, that there isn't a situation where there is zero risk. Unless someone is going to be hermetically sealing themselves in their apartment, given that we have community-wide transmission, there's no place that's going to be zero risk. What we want New Yorkers to do is to be smart, to be vigilant, and to be diligent about the recommendations that we've made, which include consistent, thorough hand washing. If you're not near a water source, to use alcohol-based hand sanitizer. You know, there can't be a press conference that goes by that I don't say that.
She literally does not know how to say hand sanitizer without saying alcohol-based in front of it.
And that on top of that, you know, covering your mouth and your nose when you cough or sneeze, that you need to be vigilant about developing symptoms such as fever and a cough, fever and shortness of breath, and that all of these preventive measures in and of themselves, doing them in isolation, isn't going to provide the maximal support, that all of these interventions together, layered on top of one of each other, are intended to not only help individuals lower their risk, but also lower the risk to their neighbors, to their families, to their communities. And so, you know, this drastic step that we're taking in terms of closing the schools is sort of the ultimate in terms of that preventive measure.
You said this morning you were not yet at the point of saying you want to shut down completely everything non-essential. Since then, you're shutting down the schools. Since then, a lot of elected officials are starting to say you should make that move. Can you say what's your thinking at this moment?
We are. So I respect anyone who calls for anything, and I'd say to them, try being the person who has to make the decision and be accountable to 8.6 million people to get it right. The human ramification of each decision is being factored in very carefully, the viability of each decision, you know, the sort of big distance between theory and practice, trying to make sure what we decide is real and viable. We had to, in the last 24 hours, really get all of us into a point where We were certain, based on the numbers, based on projections, based on other countries' experience, that we needed to take these very radical steps right now. We're taking them instantly. There's definitely more coming, but we have to account for each. For example, in the decision on schools, and I've been plaguing people throughout the week on this, all those other factors that I've talked about, all those negatives that come with closing of schools, I have been asking everyone to answer those as best they can and show me how they can mitigate at least some of the impact. I think the DOE did a great job. I think that between Monday and now, people like Chancellor Carranza and our Chief Operating Officer, Ursulina Ramirez, they have not slept much, and they have been forcing everyone to figure out alternatives in a whole new way. So it's really been a mobilization, if you will. And I think the answers got better about how we can address some of these situations. But everything, this is the honest blanket statement. You tell me a thing that might be used, and I'm telling you it's on the table. And the second we're ready to use it, we're going to tell you.
Mr. Mayor, who ultimately came up with the decision? Was it yourself or Governor Cuomo? Just yourself.
On the schools?
Yes.
That's me. Mayoral accountability for education, obviously working constantly with the chancellor.
And also, in regards to the grab-and-go meals, is that all schools? Or
Yes.
certain locations?
All confirming all schools for 5 days only.
Starting tomorrow or Tuesday?
Tomorrow at what time, Ursulina?
Starting tomorrow, and anyone 18 or under can show up to get meals.
And do you know the exact time they'll start?
When school starts, so 7:30.
Depending on each school's start time. Okay, yes.
You alluded to this earlier. Are the police going to be breaking up groups of teenagers who are in assembly?
What I said, again, let's be careful not to overstate it. If you got a bunch of teenagers hanging out and really close up against each other, what our officers should do is go and say, hey guys, you know what's going on, coronavirus, spread out. That kind of thing. And that's important to get. In fact, what our officers do with neighborhood policing all the time is talk to young people. So it's go in there, remind them what social distancing looks like, tell people spread out, be a little more careful, that kind of thing.
And if kids say no?
What's that?
If kids say no to the police?
We're going to, let's try the power of communication and persuasion. I think everyone knows what time it is.
You've alluded several times that there are still ongoing discussions about the future of bars and restaurants. Would you?
You're very interested in bars and restaurants, and I wonder if this is professional or otherwise. I'm really getting a feeling that you have a more than professional interest here.
Would you say it's only a matter of time until we see more drastic?
I'm not going to, again, as I'm real clear, everything's on the table. The next set of decisions, we're going to start in a matter of hours. We may have announcements tonight. We may have announcements tomorrow. Everything's on the table. If you love your neighborhood bar, go there now, under 50% occupancy, because we don't know what the future holds. But be only there very briefly and socially distance. Go ahead.
This is for the Chancellor. What kind of be more specific about what we're doing to get hardware into the hands of kids who don't have the hardware to do distance learning? And then also the other question was, since public schools are sometimes the first line of defense against child abuse, what is the Child Protection Agency, like, do you have any plans for ramping up resources for kids?
Yeah, so I'll do the top lines, and I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer to give some specifics. So we've surveyed, and part of the next 4 days is also to get more concrete data as to who has connectivity, who does not have connectivity. We're working on a figure of about 300,000 of our students currently may not have those devices, so we need to verify that as well. We are working with some really large companies. Apple has really stepped up to the plate. I'll let Ursulina talk a little bit specifically about the numbers. T-Mobile has also stepped up. Verizon has also stepped up. Google has stepped up. So our big partners are really stepping up to help us make this a reality. In regards to the second question, absolutely. I'm working very closely with my fellow commissioners. We're in a whole different environment now. So we're working very closely about how do we continue to monitor, how do we continue to have a pulse, what are the escalation protocols. We'll have more details as we solidify those as well. But I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer to give a little more specificity on the device and connectivity question.
Thank you so much. sir. So we are working diligently with our private partners around devices. As the Chancellor mentioned, we've surveyed our principals to ask about what kind of devices our students have and what kind of connectivity that they think that they have. So as the Chancellor mentioned, we're working with Apple to supply 300,000 iPads to our students, and we will be working on a distribution method for over the next week. We are also working, as he mentioned, with T-Mobile to make sure that those devices are activated and students can use internet on those. In addition, we're working with other partners, as he mentioned, Verizon, Spectrum, and a host of people who have really stepped up to want to support our students, so I thank them for that. So you'll be hearing more from us over the next week around how we're going to be distributing those devices and what our expectations are for the devices.
They're not gifting it to us, though. We're paying.
We are purchasing the devices, the Apple devices, but obviously they're working with us on reasonable costs for the system.
So I also want to just want to add to what Ms. Ramirez just said. So obviously we're purchasing them. We're not giving them away. So they're being assigned to students to use. Obviously, they belong to the Department of Education, but we want students to have the devices that they need. And sir, if you don't mind, because you've said we all wear the same uniform during this particular situation, I want to thank and give a shout out to our comptroller, Scott Stringer, who moved heaven and earth to allow us to be able to purchase these in record time. And it's that kind of cooperation that makes a real-time response possible.
We've still got a question over here. We'll do a few more and then we're done because we got a lot more to work on tonight. You had a question about child welfare.
I did, how are we making sure that the children facing abuse are safe as far as if we're reducing the number of face-to-face visits and things like that, and we don't have kids going in schools, like how are we handing out, is there a phone number or how are we getting...
There's usually, I've worked on these issues a lot over the years, there's a lot of different nexus points out in the community historically where there are adults watching out for that kind of problem. Obviously, police are watching out for that kind of problem, healthcare professionals, a whole host of, and obviously some of that will continue. I think you're right that there's less information flowing if schools are not in session, but we have to figure out if there's some kind of information we want to get out or some kind of special effort. The work of child protection is one of those critical elements of what we do. It's very similar to what police or fire do in my book. Different kind of work professionally, different kind of skills, but in terms of protecting people's lives. So we need that work to continue, but it will be a different approach going forward. Okay, a few more and I gotta get out of here. Hold on, dudes. I am pointing at people. Let it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for the Chancellor. I was hoping you can elaborate a little bit more on the language component. I know DOE has 9 top languages, but what about parents whose language?
Quick answers now. We have work to do.
Yep.
So I know DOE has 9 top languages, but what about parents whose languages don't fall within those?
Yeah, so more guidance will be coming, more information. We're literally building the plane and flying it right now. So we do have a whole team that's translating materials, language translation. In and of itself, we take very seriously on our website as well.
We'll update which languages it is as we go along. Yes.
Is the city doing anything to prepare for potential unrest?
Unrest?
Yeah, in this very stressful time. And what's the NYPD doing?
NYPD has that concept in its planning, I think, perennially. I don't see the context for that right now, but the point is that's the kind of thing NYPD is more than able to plan for in general. Yep. Yep.
Oh, super quick. One thing is, any thoughts on suspending alternate site parking, and then the other...
We're looking at that. We have not there, but we're looking at it.
I just want to really clarify if you were just joking about the neighborhood bar thing and just...
I am allowed to joke still. It's because again, guys, I know we're in a crisis, but I'm still a human being. It was my way of saying I cannot guarantee if bars and restaurants are still going to be open in a few days. That's all I'm saying.
I wanted to clarify that, and I just want to... It feels like you guys are stopping short of telling people who aren't sick or aren't displaying symptoms to stay home and cut out non-essential...
Again, we're trying to be clear about, yes, cut out anything non-essential. That does not mean that people are not going to exercise their judgment if something is particularly precious to them or important. We still understand human beings are human beings. But I'll tell you something. I appreciate the precision of your question. But if people would just do the basics, we would be in a much stronger position. So if every single New Yorker did not go to work or anywhere they're sick, did not send their kid anywhere if they were sick, did not visit anyone else if they were sick, and did not do anything that they don't have to do in terms of their day-to-day life, like if they can telecommute instead of going into the office, telecommute. We get those basics right, we're going to be in a much stronger position. I am not yet at a draconian, perfect place of saying you cannot leave your door. I would like people to keep it to a minimum. All right, thanks, everyone.